The scream tore through the trees before Elena even opened her eyes. She was on her feet in an instant, heart slamming against her ribs, the cold night air biting at her skin. Around her, the Omega sleeping quarters had turned into chaos. Wolves were shifting mid-run, claws scraping against wood, voices shouting over each other in the dark. "They're inside the fence," someone yelled. "The Ashbourne are inside the fence." Elena grabbed the nearest wall to steady herself. For 7 years, she had trained her body to stay calm, to stay small, to stay forgettable, but nothing had trained her for this. The Blackwood pack had not been raided in a generation, and now, in the space of a single breath, the borders had failed. She pushed through the door and out into the yard, where moonlight spilled over rows of cabins, and the scent of fear hung thick in the air. Pack members ran past her, some already in wolf form, others still stumbling into their clothes. Somewhere near the north fence, something growled low and wrong, a sound that did not belong to any Blackwood wolf. Elena's first instinct was to run the other way. Hide, survive. That instinct had kept her alive for 7 years, ever since the night her family died and she arrived at Blackwood with nothing but a false name and a secret buried so deep she sometimes forgot it herself. But then she saw Mira. Her friend was on the ground near the training field, one arm curled against her body, blood soaking through the sleeve of her shirt. A pack of unfamiliar wolves circled her, eyes glowing an unnatural shade of violet, a color Elena had only heard about in warnings passed between Omegas and whispers. Ashbourne wolves, hunters, the kind of wolves that did not raid for territory. They raided for blood, and for something else entirely. Elena's whole body went cold. She had spent 7 years hiding what she was. 7 years of forcing her wolf into a shape that was not her own, wearing a gray coat over a truth that could burn the world down if anyone ever saw it. She had promised herself, over and over, that no matter what happened, she would never let that secret surface again. But Mira was on the ground, and the Ashbourne wolves were closing in. Elena's hands shook as she stared at the scene in front of her. She could turn and run toward the tree line, disappear into the dark the way she always had, the way that had kept her safe for so long. Or, she could do the one thing she had sworn never to do again. A wolf lunged toward Mira, jaws open. Elena did not remember deciding. One moment she was standing frozen at the edge of the field, and the next she was running. Faster than she had ever let herself run in front of anyone. Faster than any Omega was supposed to be able to move. The transformation ripped through her before she could stop it, bones shifting, fur erupting across her skin in a blinding wave of white. The Ashbourne wolf that had been lunging toward Mira skidded backward, suddenly facing something it had clearly never expected to see standing in the middle of Blackwood territory. A wolf as white as fresh snow, eyes glowing not violet, but a pale, impossible silver. For one heartbeat, everything stopped. The fighting nearby seemed to pause. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Every wolf on that field, friend and enemy alike, turned to look at the creature standing over Mira's fallen body. Elena knew, in that single frozen moment, that her 7 years of hiding were over. She had come to Blackwood as a child with nothing left in the world. Her parents were gone, her home was ash, and the only thing she carried with her across 300 miles of forest was a warning whispered by her mother in her final moments. Never let them see your true color. Never let anyone know what you are. Elena had been 10 years old when the fire took her family's cabin in the northern hills. She still remembered the smell of smoke curling through the trees, the sound of her father's voice telling her to run and not look back, the way her mother had pressed a small carved pendant into her hand before pushing her out through the back window. She had run until her legs gave out, until the forest around her turned into a blur of green and brown, until she collapsed at the edge of Blackwood territory, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. The pack that found her did not ask many questions. Omegas rarely did. She was given a bed in the lowest quarters, a title with no honor attached to it, and a life built on being overlooked. Elena had learned quickly that the safest place to stand was in the shadow of everyone else's attention. She trained just enough to avoid punishment, and never enough to draw praise. She kept her eyes down during pack meetings. She spoke only when spoken to. She let the other wolves believe she was weak, slow, and unremarkable, because unremarkable wolves did not get watched closely, and wolves that were not watched closely could keep secrets. The secret was simple, and it was enormous. Elena was not an ordinary wolf. Beneath the plain gray coat she wore during every shift, hidden by a suppression skill she had taught herself through years of painful practice, lived a true form unlike anything the modern packs had seen in generations. A pure white wolf, a bloodline the elders spoke of only in old stories, always followed by a warning, never a celebration. The white wolves, the stories said, were born once every few generations, and their appearance always meant one of two things. Either the wolf world was about to be saved, or it was about to be torn apart. Elena had no interest in being either. She only wanted to survive. For 7 years, that plan had worked. She trained just enough to blend in. She avoided eye contact with the alpha and his warriors. She spent her nights alone in the forest beyond the fence, where she practiced holding her suppression steady, where she let her true form flicker just long enough to remind herself it was still there, still hers, before folding it back down into hiding. It was exhausting, lonely work, but it kept her alive, and it kept the people around her safe from whatever danger her existence might invite. The only person who had ever come close to the truth was Mira. They had met on Elena's first week at Blackwood, both of them assigned to the same row of Omega cabins. Both of them knew enough to the pack that they had no one else to talk to. Mira never asked the questions other wolves whispered behind Elena's back. She never asked why Elena flinched at loud noises, or why she disappeared into the woods every night, or why her eyes sometimes seemed to hold a strange light when the moon was full. Mira simply stayed, offering quiet company on the nights Elena could not stand to be alone, sitting beside her at meals when no one else would, defending her in small ways that never drew attention to either of them. It was the kind of friendship that survival did not usually allow for, and it was the reason Elena had let herself care about someone at Blackwood at all. Which was exactly why, when she saw Mira bleeding on the ground with Ashbourne wolves circling her, Elena's careful discipline broke apart in an instant. The white wolf that emerged from Elena's body that night was larger than any wolf on the field, its coat catching the moonlight in a way that made it look almost lit from within. It moved with a speed and precision that 7 years of quiet Omega training had never revealed, muscles coiling and releasing with a grace that belonged to something far older than Elena's 23 years. The Ashbourne wolves scattered back, snarling in confusion, their violet eyes narrowing as they took in the impossible sight in front of them. One of the larger wolves, clearly some kind of pack leader among the raiders, let out a sharp bark that sounded almost like a command. The others fell into a loose formation, no longer focused on Mira at all. Every hungry eye on that field had turned toward Elena. She should have been terrified. Some small, distant part of her mind screamed that this was the exact moment she had spent 7 years trying to avoid, the moment her family had died trying to prevent. But standing there, fully herself for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena felt something else entirely. Something sharp and clear and almost like relief. She lowered her head and let out a warning growl that rattled through the training field, deep and resonant, in a way that made even the confident Ashbourne leader take a half-step back. Behind her, Mira let out a weak, disbelieving laugh. "Elena," she whispered, staring up at the white wolf with wide eyes. "I always knew there was something about you." There was no time to explain, no time to apologize for 7 years of secrets. The Ashbourne leader let out a snarl and lunged, and the field exploded into motion once more. Elena moved before she could think, placing herself firmly between the attacking wolf and Mira's injured body. Claws met claws in a burst of white and violet, the two forms colliding with a force that sent both wolves skidding across the packed dirt of the training field. Elena recovered first, years of forest solitude having taught her instincts no formal training could match, and she drove the Ashbourne wolf back with 3 quick strikes, forcing it to retreat toward the tree line. Around them, the rest of the Blackwood defenders finally began to turn the tide of the battle, rallying now that the initial shock of the ambush had passed. Wolves that had been scattered and disorganized moments earlier began fighting in coordinated pairs, pushing the invaders steadily back toward the broken section of fence they had come through. But it was the white wolf on the training field that every remaining eye kept returning to. From the ridge above the pack houses, half hidden in shadow, Alpha Damian Cross watched the battle unfold, with a stillness that belied the storm building behind his eyes. He had taken command of Blackwood only months earlier, inheriting a pack still grieving his father's sudden death, still adjusting to new leadership during an already tense season of border disputes. He had expected challenges. He had not expected this. He had noticed Elena before, in the quiet way a careful leader notices anything slightly out of place. There had been small things, a stillness in her that did not match the nervous energy of most Omegas, an unusual awareness in her eyes during pack meetings, as though she were watching everyone else more closely than they were watching her. A tendency to vanish into the tree line after dark and not return for hours. He had filed these details away without acting on them, telling himself there would be time later to understand the quiet Omega who seemed to carry more weight than her rank suggested. He had not expected the truth to reveal itself in the middle of an Ashbourne raid, in the form of a fully grown white wolf standing at the center of his training field, glowing faintly under the moon, like something out of the oldest stories his father used to tell him as a child. Damien's hands curled into fists at his sides. There would be questions. There would need to be answers. But first, there was a battle still raging below him, and whatever Elena truly was, right now she was the only thing standing between his pack and disaster. He shifted and dropped from the ridge, joining the fight. The battle did not last much longer. Whatever advantage the Ashbourne wolves had gained by breaching the fence unnoticed evaporated the moment their numbers became clear, and the Blackwood defenders regrouped. Faced with a coordinated pack, an unexpectedly fierce white wolf, and an alpha who fought with the controlled fury of someone protecting everything he had left, the raiders broke formation and fled back through the gap in the fence, disappearing into the dark forest beyond the border. Silence fell over the training field, broken only by the ragged breathing of exhausted wolves and the soft, pained groan of Mira trying to sit up. Elena shifted back to her human form without thinking, kneeling beside her friend, checking the wound on her arm, with hands that trembled from adrenaline rather than fear. "Don't move," she said quietly. "You're bleeding too much. Someone get the healer." A few wolves nearby rushed to obey, but most of the pack remained frozen where they stood, staring at Elena with expressions ranging from disbelief to something closer to awe. Whispers began to spread across the field, quiet at first, then louder, carrying a single word from mouth to mouth, like sparks jumping between dry branches. "White wolf. White wolf. The white wolf is real." Elena kept her eyes on Mira, refusing to look up, refusing to acknowledge the weight of dozens of stares now fixed on her. 7 years of careful invisibility had ended in the space of a few minutes, and there was no version of tonight that would let her return to the life she had built. A shadow fell over her, and she finally looked up to find Alpha Damien Cross standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable, his eyes moving between her and the healer now kneeling beside Mira. "You saved her life," he said, his voice low enough that only Elena could hear it clearly. Elena swallowed hard, unsure whether the words were meant as gratitude or as the opening line of an interrogation. "She's my friend," Elena said simply. It was the only explanation she had, and it was the only one that mattered to her. Damien studied her for a long moment, and Elena forced herself not to look away, even though every instinct she had built over 7 years screamed at her to run into the trees and disappear. Whatever came next, hiding was no longer an option. "We need to talk," Damien said finally. "Tonight, alone." It was not a request. Elena nodded once, feeling the last fragile piece of the life she had built at Blackwood settle quietly into the past. Around her, the whispers continued to spread, carried from cabin to cabin, from wolf to wolf, until by morning there would not be a single soul in Blackwood territory who had not heard the story of the Omega who was not an Omega at all. She helped the healer lift Mira and carry her toward the medical cabin, her mind racing far ahead of her feet, already trying to calculate what tomorrow would look like now that the truth was finally, irreversibly, out in the open. Somewhere in the dark forest beyond the broken fence, the Ashbourne wolves that had fled were already regrouping, already sending word back to whoever had ordered the raid in the first place. Word that would travel far faster than Elena could have imagined, carrying a message that would change everything. The White Wolf bloodline was not extinct after all, and now, everyone would know exactly where to find her. Morning came too fast. Elena had not slept. She had spent the hours after the attack sitting outside the medical cabin, watching through the window as the healer stitched the wound on Mira's arm, waiting until her friend's breathing settled into something steady and safe. Only then had she allowed herself to walk back toward her own cabin, and even then, sleep never came. She lay on her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment her control had broken, feeling the ghost of white fur still prickling under her skin. By the time the sun rose over the tree line, the entire pack already knew. She could feel it the moment she stepped outside. Conversations stopped when she passed. Doors that used to stay half open now closed quietly as she walked by. Wolves who had never spared her a second glance in 7 years now watched her from a distance, some with open curiosity, others with something closer to suspicion. A few, the oldest members of the pack, watched her with expressions Elena recognized instantly, because she had seen that same look on her mother's face the night their home burned down. Fear. She kept her head high, and her steps steady, refusing to let 7 years of careful discipline crumble in a single morning. She had survived worse than stairs. She told herself that over and over as she made her way toward the Alpha's house, where a message had been waiting for her at dawn, written in Damien's neat, efficient handwriting. Come at first light, alone. The walk felt longer than it should have. Blackwood territory was not large, and Elena had walked this path countless times over the years, delivering messages, running errands, keeping her head down. But today, every step felt heavier, every pair of eyes following her felt sharper, and by the time she reached the Alpha's front door, her hands were trembling slightly at her sides. Damien opened the door before she could knock. He looked as though he had not slept much either, dark circles shadowing eyes that were sharper and more alert than exhaustion should have allowed. He studied her for a long moment before stepping aside to let her in, his expression carefully neutral in the way Elena imagined leaders learned to master over years of difficult conversations. Sit, he said, gesturing toward a chair near the unlit fireplace. Elena sat, spine straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. She had rehearsed a dozen different explanations during the sleepless night, but now, facing him directly, every carefully prepared sentence disappeared from her mind. Damien did not sit across from her right away. Instead, he paced slowly near the window, arms crossed, clearly choosing his words with the same care Elena usually reserved for hiding her secrets. 7 years, he said finally. You've lived here 7 years, and not once did anyone suspect what you were hiding. Not my father, not the elders, not me, until last night. He turned to face her. How? It was not really a question, but Elena answered it anyway. Practice, she said quietly. A lot of practice, and a lot of time alone in the forest. The suppression, Damien said. I've heard of it in old stories, but I've never seen a wolf actually do it. Holding a false form for that long, every single day, for 7 years. Do you understand what that kind of control means? Elena looked down at her hands. It means I survived. Something in her tone made Damien pause. He finally sat down across from her, leaning forward slightly, his expression softening just a fraction. Tell me what happened to your family, he said, the real story, not whatever version you told my father when you arrived here. Elena's throat tightened. She had told the same careful lie for 7 years, a story about a fire caused by lightning, a family lost to bad luck and worse timing. It was close enough to the truth to be believable, and vague enough to avoid questions, but sitting across from Damien now, after everything that had happened the night before, the lie felt suddenly unbearable to repeat. They were hunted, she said quietly. My parents. They were part of the old bloodline, the White Wolves, though they never showed it the way I do. My mother could suppress her form too, though not as well as I can. My father couldn't shift into a white wolf at all, but he carried the bloodline in his blood, passed down from his mother. We lived far from any pack territory, in the northern hills, because my parents believed it was safer to stay hidden than to seek protection from any alpha. She paused, forcing herself to keep going, even as the memory clawed at her chest. One night, wolves came, not Blackwood, not any pack I recognized. They burned our home to the ground. My mother pushed me out through a back window and told me to run and never look back. I don't know what happened to her after that. I don't know what happened to my father. I ran until I found Blackwood territory, and I never told anyone the truth, because the wolves who attacked us were looking for exactly what I am. Damien was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes carrying something that looked almost like guilt. though Elena couldn't understand why he would feel responsible for something that happened years before he became Alpha. "The wolves who attacked last night," he said slowly. "Their eyes. Did you notice the color?" Elena nodded. "Violet. I've never seen that before, but my mother mentioned it once, a long time ago. She said there was an old pack, one that hunted white wolves specifically, and their eyes carried a mark from some kind of ritual passed down through generations of hunters." "The Ashbourne," Damien said, his voice hardening. "We've had tension with them before. Border disputes, territory disagreements, but nothing like last night. This wasn't a normal raid. They came through the fence in a specific location, moved with purpose, and the moment they saw you, everything else stopped mattering to them. They weren't after territory, they were after you." The words settled over Elena like a physical weight. She had spent 7 years convincing herself that if she simply stayed hidden long enough, whatever hunted her family would eventually lose interest, move on, forget. She had never let herself consider the possibility that the hunt had never actually stopped, that it had simply been waiting, patient and quiet, for her to make one mistake.
"They'll come back,"
she said quietly.
"Yes."
Damien agreed. "And when they do, they'll come with more numbers, and they'll come prepared for exactly what you are now that they've seen it." Elena's hands curled into fists in her lap. "Then I should leave," she said, "before they come back. Before more of your wolves get hurt because of me. Mira almost died last night because I hesitated, and if I hadn't hesitated, maybe she wouldn't have been hurt at all." "No," Damien said, his voice sharp enough that Elena looked up in surprise. "You don't leave. Running is exactly what let them corner you and your family in the first place. Blackwood has resources, warriors, and a fence that failed once and will not fail again. You're safer here, surrounded by wolves who are willing to fight for you, than you would be alone in the forest, waiting for them to find you again." "Willing to fight for me," Elena repeated, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "You saw the faces this morning, Alpha. Some of your pack looked at me like I'm a threat, not someone worth protecting." "Some of them are afraid," Damien admitted. "Fear makes people say and think foolish things. But fear passes, and loyalty, when it's real, lasts longer than fear does. Give them time." Elena studied him carefully, trying to read past the careful, measured tone of a leader managing a crisis, searching for something more honest underneath. "Why does this matter to you?" she asked. "Really, you've been Alpha for a few months. You could easily decide I'm too much trouble, too dangerous a target to keep inside your borders, and send me away with no one questioning the decision." Damien's expression shifted, something more personal, briefly breaking through the composed mask of leadership. "Because my father spent his entire life talking about honor," he said quietly. "About protecting the wolves who came to Blackwood looking for safety, no matter their rank, no matter their history. You walked into this territory 7 years ago as a frightened child, with nowhere else to go, and this pack took you in without asking hard questions. I'm not about to undo that now, just because the truth turned out to be more complicated than anyone expected." Elena felt something tighten in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her with that kind of steady conviction, and longer still since she had allowed herself to believe someone might actually mean it. "There's something else," Damien added, his tone shifting into something more careful. "The old stories about the White Wolf bloodline. My father used to tell them to me when I was young, before he became Alpha. He said the White Wolves were tied to something larger than any single pack, some kind of balance between wolfkind and the old forces that shaped our world, long before the first packs formed. He said their appearance always came at a turning point, a moment when the future of every pack territory hung on a single choice." "That sounds like a children's story," Elena said, though her voice lacked real conviction. "Maybe it is," Damien said. "But children's stories sometimes carry more truth than we want to admit, especially when a woman who has spent 7 years disguising herself as an ordinary Omega, those stories warned about." Elena did not have an answer for that. She had spent so many years focused entirely on survival, on making herself small enough to escape notice, that she had never allowed herself to consider what her existence might actually mean, beyond her own life and safety. The idea that she might matter to something larger than herself was both terrifying and, in some small and unfamiliar way, strangely steadying. "What happens now?" she asked finally. Damien stood, moving toward the window, looking out over the training field where the battle had taken place only hours earlier. "Now," he said, "we prepare. I'll strengthen the border defenses, double the night watch, and send word to a few allied packs about what happened here. And you," he turned back to face her, "you stop hiding what you are. Not because it's convenient, but because pretending to be less than what you are almost got you and Mira killed last night. If the Ashbourne already know the truth, there's no reason for you to keep carrying that weight alone anymore." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist that hiding had kept her alive for 7 years, and would continue to work if she simply tried harder, ran farther, disappeared more completely. But some deeper, more honest part of her recognized the truth in Damien's words. Hiding had not saved her family. It had only delayed the inevitable, and last night had proven that delay came with a price too steep to keep paying. "Okay," she said quietly, the word feeling strange and unfamiliar in her mouth after 7 years of careful denial. "No more hiding." Damien nodded, something that might have been the beginning of respect settling into his expression. "Good," he said. "Because Blackwood is going to need every advantage it has, and right now, that advantage is standing in my living room." Outside, the sound of pack members moving through the territory carried faintly through the window, voices still buzzing with the news from the night before. Elena took a slow breath, feeling the weight of 7 years of secrecy shift into something new, something uncertain, but no longer entirely hers to carry alone. The days that followed the attack moved differently than any Elena had known before. For 7 years, her life had followed a careful, predictable rhythm. Wake before dawn, complete her assigned duties without drawing attention, disappear into the forest after dark to maintain her control, return before anyone noticed her absence. That rhythm had kept her safe, but it had also kept her small, folded inward, a life lived at half its true size. Now everything had changed, and Elena found herself struggling to adjust to a world where hiding was no longer the answer. Damien kept his word about strengthening the border. Within 2 days, the broken section of fence had been rebuilt and reinforced, new patrol routes established, and extra warriors assigned to the night watch. Elena watched the preparations from a distance at first, unsure of her place in a pack that was still adjusting to the truth about her, but by the 3rd day, Damien summoned her again, this time with a request she had not expected. "I want you training with the warriors," he said, standing at the edge of the training field where the attack had taken place only days before. Elena blinked at him. "I'm an Omega," she said. "I've never trained as a warrior." "You fought off an Ashbourne pack leader without any formal combat training," Damien pointed out. "Imagine what you could do with some." The idea unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. 7 years of deliberately underperforming, of holding back, of making herself appear weaker than she was, had become such a deep habit that the thought of training openly, of allowing herself to actually try, felt almost dangerous in a different way. But Mira, healing steadily from her injury, had encouraged her without hesitation. "You saved my life," her friend said one evening, sitting beside Elena near the edge of the forest. "You don't have to apologize for that, and you definitely don't have to keep pretending you're less than what you are, not anymore. Not here." So Elena began training. It was strange at first, to move without restraint. Years of suppression had trained her body to hold back instinctively, and unlearning that habit took real, deliberate effort. But slowly, over the following days, something in her began to loosen. She learned to read an opponent's stance, to anticipate an attack before it landed, to move with a speed and precision that surprised even the most experienced Blackwood warriors. Damien trained alongside her more often than his position strictly required, and Elena noticed, though she tried not to dwell on it, that he seemed to seek out these sessions rather than simply delegate them to someone else. He was a careful teacher, patient in a way that did not match the sharp, guarded alpha she had first sat across from in his living room. He corrected her form without condescension, pushed her limits without cruelty, and on more than one occasion, Elena caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite name, something between curiosity and quiet respect. "You fight like someone who's spent years holding back," he said one afternoon, after she had disarmed one of his most experienced warriors in a sparring match that left the entire training field briefly silent. "I have," Elena admitted, catching her breath. "Why?" Damien asked. Even before the raid, before anyone knew what you were, you could have trained properly all along. Why hold back for 7 years? Elena considered the question carefully before answering. Because strong wolves get noticed, she said. And I couldn't afford to be noticed. Every skill I showed, every strength I displayed, was one more thing that might have given me away. So I learned to disappear instead. It felt safer than being seen. And now? Damien asked. Elena looked around the training field, at the warriors sparring nearby, at the reinforced fence line beyond them, at the pack that had begun, slowly and unevenly, to accept the truth of what she was. Now I think hiding cost me more than it ever protected, she said. I'm tired of being smaller than I actually am. Damien's expression shifted into something that looked almost like pride, though he said nothing more, simply nodding once before resetting his stance for another round. Not everyone in the pack shared his acceptance, however. Elena noticed the divide growing more visible each day, splitting the pack into those who saw her as a valuable ally and those who still eyed her with open suspicion. A few of the older wolves, particularly those who remembered stories about the White Wolf bloodline from their own childhoods, avoided her entirely, muttering quietly about omens and warnings whenever she passed. Others, especially the younger warriors who had fought beside her during the raid, treated her with something closer to admiration, eager to hear stories about her true form, curious about the strength she had kept hidden for so long. The tension came to a head about a week after the attack, during a pack meeting, called to discuss the ongoing threat from the Ashborn. Elena sat near the back of the gathering, still uncertain of her place in these formal discussions, listening as Damien outlined the defensive measures already in place and the additional precautions being considered. It was going smoothly, methodical and calm, until an older warrior named Elias rose from his seat, his expression tight with barely restrained frustration. With respect, Alpha, Elias said, his voice carrying easily across the gathered pack. We're discussing strategy, as though the real problem here is the Ashborn's aggression. But the real problem started the moment she arrived at our border 7 years ago carrying a bloodline that draws hunters like moths to flame. We took her in without asking enough questions, and now our pack is paying the price for that mercy. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Elena felt her face heat, old instincts screaming at her to shrink down, to disappear, to avoid the confrontation entirely. But she forced herself to remain seated, spine straight, refusing to let 7 years of practiced invisibility take control now. Damien's expression darkened. Careful, Elias, he said, his voice low but carrying unmistakable authority. You're speaking about a member of this pack, who nearly died defending Mira during that raid. A member who has trained alongside our warriors without complaint since then. If you have concerns about pack safety, I want to hear them. But I won't tolerate blame placed on the person who was hunted, rather than the wolves who did the hunting. She's a target, Elias pressed. Every day she stays here, she puts the rest of us at risk. I'm not saying we should have turned her away 7 years ago. I'm saying we need to consider what protecting her costs the rest of the pack, now that the truth is out. Elena stood before Damien could respond, her heart pounding but her voice steady. I understand the fear, she said, addressing Elias directly, her eyes moving across the gathered crowd as she spoke. I've lived with that same fear for 7 years, every single day, wondering if today would be the day someone finally found me. I know exactly what it feels like to be afraid of what I am. But I am not the danger here. The Ashborn are the danger. And running from that danger, whether it's me running from this pack or this pack running from its responsibility to protect its own, has never solved anything. It only delays the inevitable. The gathering fell silent, dozens of eyes fixed on her. Elena continued, her voice growing steadier with each word. I've spent 7 years hiding what I am to keep everyone around me safe, and it took one night for me to realize that hiding never actually protected anyone. It only kept me alone. I'm done being alone. If Blackwood will have me, truly have me, I want to fight for this pack the same way it took me in when I had nowhere else to go. But if the pack decides that's too much of a risk, I'll accept that too, and I'll leave before I bring more danger to your door. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mira, still favoring her healing arm slightly, rose from her seat near the front of the gathering. I'm alive because of her, Mira said simply. I don't need to hear any more arguments about whether she belongs here. She's already proven it. Slowly, other voices began to join. Warriors who had fought beside Elena during the raid. Wolves who had watched her train tirelessly over the past week. Pack members who remembered the quiet, careful Omega who had never caused trouble in 7 years of living among them. The tide of the room shifted, not entirely, not without lingering doubt from a few corners, but enough that Elias sat back down without further argument, his expression still troubled, but no longer openly hostile. Damien addressed the gathering once the murmurs settled. "Elena stays," he said firmly, "not because I'm ordering it, but because this pack, when it matters most, chooses to protect its own. We move forward together, prepared for whatever comes next." The meeting continued, moving into practical discussions of patrol schedules and defensive strategy, but Elena barely heard any of it, still absorbing the strange, unfamiliar warmth of being defended openly, of having her place in a community affirmed rather than quietly tolerated. Afterward, as the pack dispersed back to their evening duties, Damien found her near the edge of the field, the two of them watching the sun sink behind the tree line. "Thank you," Elena said quietly, "for what you said in there." "I meant every word," Damien replied. "And for what it's worth, what you said, about being done hiding, about wanting to fight for this pack, that took more courage than anything I've seen on a battlefield." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, unused to praise delivered so directly. "I almost lost everything by staying quiet for so long," she said. "I'd rather lose it by standing up than by disappearing." Damien studied her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, that neither seemed ready to name. "We'll figure out the rest together," he said finally. "The Ashbourne, the bloodline, whatever comes next. You're not facing any of it alone anymore." Elena looked out at the darkening tree line, remembering the last time someone had made her a promise like that, remembering how quickly that promise had been broken by fire and loss. But something about the steadiness in Damien's voice made her want to believe, just this once, that promises could still be kept. 2 weeks passed before the Ashbourne made contact again, and when they did, it was not with claws or fire, but with words. A messenger arrived at Blackwood's border under a flag of parley, a lone gray wolf carrying a folded letter, sealed with a violet wax stamp. The guards on duty escorted him cautiously to the Alpha's house, and within the hour, Damien had called Elena, along with his senior warriors, to review the message together. The letter was short, and its tone was almost politely threatening, a contradiction that unsettled Elena more than open hostility would have. It read simply that the Ashbourne Alpha, a wolf named Silas Ravenwood, wished to discuss the return of what he called stolen property, and that a formal meeting had been requested at neutral ground along the eastern ridge, 3 days from now, under the traditional rules of parley that govern disputes between packs. "Stolen property," Elena repeated, disgust curling through her voice as she read the words again. "As if I'm an object that belongs to him." "He believes the White Wolf bloodline belongs to whoever can claim it," Damien said grimly, setting the letter down on the table. "The Ashbourne have hunted white wolves for generations, believing the bloodline carries a kind of power that, if properly harnessed, could make whoever controls it the strongest force in the entire wolf world. It's an old belief, one most modern packs dismissed as legend, but the Ashbourne clearly never stopped believing it." "You're not considering actually meeting with him," Elena said, alarm sharpening her voice. "I'm considering it very seriously," Damien replied. "Parley meetings are protected by ancient pack law. No violence is permitted on neutral ground, under threat of every allied pack turning against whoever breaks that rule. It's one of the few opportunities we'll have to understand exactly what Silas wants and what resources he's willing to commit to getting it, without risking another direct confrontation." Elena's hands curled into fists at her sides. "And if he breaks the rule anyway? If this is just another trap? Then he loses every ally he has left in the wolf world," Damien said. "Even wolves who fear the white bloodline respect the old laws. Breaking parley isn't a risk Silas can afford to take, not if he wants any support beyond his own pack." Elena wanted to argue further, but she also recognized the strategic value in gathering more information, in understanding the enemy they were facing, rather than simply waiting anxiously behind reinforced fences for the next attack. "If you go," she said finally, "I'm going with you." Damien hesitated. "It might be safer for you to stay here, behind the border." "He's asking for me specifically," Elena said. "Sending you to negotiate alone. About me, without me present, feels like exactly the kind of decision that would make things worse, not better. I need to see him. I need to understand what we're facing. After a long, tense discussion among the senior warriors, it was agreed. Elena would accompany Damien to the parley meeting, along with a small, carefully selected escort of Blackwood's most trusted fighters, prepared for the possibility, however unlikely, that Silas might attempt to break the old laws. The 3 days leading up to the meeting passed in a blur of preparation and quiet dread. Elena trained harder than ever, pushing herself through exhausting sessions with Damien and the other warriors, determined to walk into that meeting as strong and capable as she could possibly be. At night, she practiced holding her true form for longer stretches, no longer suppressing it out of habit, but strengthening her control in the opposite direction, learning to shift fully and hold that form with confidence rather than fear. Mira watched these preparations with quiet concern, though she never tried to talk Elena out of going. "Just promise me you'll be careful," Mira said, the night before they were set to leave. "I only just got you back as a real friend, not a secret. I'd like to keep you around a while longer." "I promise," Elena said, though the words felt heavier than she wanted to admit. The morning of the meeting arrived cold and overcast, gray clouds hanging low over the eastern ridge, as Elena, Damien, and their small escort made their way toward the designated meeting point. The ridge marked a natural boundary between several pack territories, a stretch of open, rocky ground where no single pack held formal claim, making it a traditional site for negotiations and disputes throughout wolf history. The Ashbourne party was already waiting when they arrived. Silas Ravenwood stood at the center of his group, and Elena understood immediately why his name carried such weight among the packs that feared him. He was tall, even in human form, with sharp, calculating eyes, the same unnerving violet shade she had seen on the wolves during the raid. Unlike the raw, hungry aggression of his warriors, Silas carried himself with a cold, controlled confidence that felt somehow more dangerous than open hostility ever could. "Alpha Cross," Silas said, inclining his head slightly in a gesture of formal respect that felt hollow given the circumstances. "And this must be the wolf my scouts described so vividly." His eyes settled on Elena, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "The white bloodline. I confess, I had begun to doubt the stories were true." "State your business, Silas," Damien said, his tone clipped and businesslike, refusing to indulge in further pleasantries. "Your letter mentions stolen property. I'd like to understand exactly what you believe belongs to you." Silas's expression sharpened, a thin smile spreading across his face that did not reach his eyes. "The white bloodline does not belong to Blackwood, Alpha Cross. It never has. It belongs to whoever can properly wield its power, and my pack has spent generations preparing for exactly that purpose. Your Omega," he gestured toward Elena, with a casual wave that made her want to lunge forward and knock the smugness off his face, "is simply the current vessel for something far more important than her own life." "She's a person," Elena said sharply, unable to hold her tongue any longer. "Not a vessel, not property, and I have no intention of going anywhere with you." Silas's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment, something flickered behind his cold eyes, something that looked almost like genuine surprise at being addressed so directly. "You misunderstand my intentions," he said smoothly. "I have no interest in causing you harm. Quite the opposite. The white bloodline, properly trained, properly guided, could reshape the balance of power across every pack territory in this region. I'm offering you a place among wolves who understand exactly what you are and exactly what you could become, rather than a pack that will always see you as a curiosity, a liability, or worse, a weapon to be used when convenient." "I'd rather stay a curiosity at Blackwood than a weapon in your hands," Elena said flatly. Silas's smile faded, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "That is unfortunate," he said, "because my pack has dedicated generations to this pursuit, and I am not inclined to abandon that work, simply because the vessel in question prefers a different arrangement." "Careful," Damien warned, stepping slightly in front of Elena, his voice carrying a low, dangerous edge. "This is a parley meeting, Silas. Threats have no place here." "I'm not threatening anyone, Alpha Cross," Silas said, his tone returning to its earlier smoothness, though the cold glint in his eyes remained. "I'm simply stating facts. My pack will continue pursuing what we believe rightfully belongs within our control. Whether that pursuit remains peaceful or become something more forceful, depends entirely on the choices made here today, and in the days that follow. Then let me make Blackwood's position clear, Damien said, his voice hardening. Elena is a member of this pack, protected under the same laws that protect every wolf within our borders. Any further aggression toward her, toward Blackwood, toward any pack member, will be met with the full strength of our warriors, and I suspect, given recent events, the support of several allied packs who have no patience for hunters who prey on the vulnerable. Silas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the first genuine crack in his composed exterior. Allied packs, he repeated. How reassuring, that Blackwood believes itself so beloved among its neighbors. We shall see how quickly that support materializes, when the true nature of what your pack is harboring becomes more widely known. The threat hung in the cold morning air, unmistakable despite its careful phrasing. Elena felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the overcast weather. Silas was not simply threatening violence, he was threatening to spread word of what she was, to turn other packs against Blackwood through fear and rumor, achieving through politics what he could not yet achieve through direct force. You'll find Blackwood's allies less easily swayed by fear than you expect, Damien said, though Elena noticed a flicker of concern cross his expression before he masked it again. Silas studied them both for a long moment, then inclined his head once more in that same hollow gesture of respect. This meeting has been informative, he said. I look forward to our next encounter, Alpha Cross. I suspect it will not be nearly so civil. Without another word, Silas turned and led his party back across the ridge, disappearing into the tree line on the far side of the boundary, leaving Elena, Damien, and their escort standing alone in the cold, gray morning. He's not going to stop, Elena said quietly, once the Ashbourne party had fully vanished from sight. No, Damien agreed, but now we understand exactly what we're facing. He wants to control the bloodline, not simply destroy it, which means he'll be more careful than a pack that simply wants you eliminated. That carefulness gives us time, and time is something we can use. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the empty ridge where Silas had stood only moments before. He's going to spread rumors, try to turn other packs against Blackwood. Then we get ahead of it, Damien said, determination hardening his voice. We reach out to our allies first, tell our own story, before Silas has the chance to twist it into something else. We're not facing this alone, Elena. Not you, and not Blackwood. As they made their way back toward the safety of Blackwood's fence, Elena found herself thinking, for the first time in 7 years, that maybe survival did not have to mean facing every threat entirely alone. The weeks following the parley meeting settled into an uneasy rhythm, one built around preparation rather than peace. Damien sent messengers to 3 allied pack territories, requesting formal meetings to discuss the growing Ashbourne threat before Silas had the chance to spread his own version of events. Elena, though nervous about the idea of other alphas learning what she was, understood the necessity, and she agreed to accompany Damien on these visits, choosing honesty over the exhausting cycle of hiding that had defined so much of her life. The first meeting, with the neighboring Thornfield pack, went better than Elena had dared to hope. Alpha Rowan Ashby, an older wolf with a reputation for fairness, listened carefully to their account of the raid and the parley meeting, asking pointed but respectful questions about the white bloodline and the history behind it. I've heard the old stories, Rowan admitted, once Elena had finished explaining her family's history and the years she had spent hiding at Blackwood. Most alphas my age dismissed them as superstition, but my grandmother used to speak of the white wolves with something closer to reverence than fear. She said their appearance always marked a choice point for the wolf world, a moment when the future could bend toward protection or toward exploitation, depending on who stood beside them when it mattered most. And which side do you plan to stand on, Alpha Ashby? Damien asked directly. Rowan considered the question carefully before answering. Silas Ravenwood has caused trouble along shared borders for years, long before any of this began. His pack's obsession with old bloodlines and lost power has always struck me as more dangerous than useful. I have no interest in seeing that kind of ambition rewarded with the strength this bloodline apparently offers. Thornfield stands with Blackwood. Relief washed through Elena at the words, though she tried not to let it show too openly. The second and third meetings with the smaller Hollowmere and Greystone packs followed similar patterns, cautious curiosity giving way to firm alliance once the full truth of the Ashbournes' intentions became clear. By the end of the month, Blackwood had secured formal support from 3 neighboring packs, a network of alliance that Damien believed would give the Ashbournes significant pause before attempting another direct assault. But allies alone would not be enough, and Elena knew it. Late one evening, weeks after the parley meeting, she found herself unable to sleep, restless energy pulling her out into the training field long after most of the pack had settled in for the night. She had grown more comfortable training openly in recent weeks, no longer needing the cover of darkness to practice her true form, but old habits still occasionally pulled her toward solitary, moonlit sessions. She shifted fully, feeling the familiar rush of her true form settling over her, white fur catching the pale moonlight in a way that had once felt like a dangerous secret and now felt, slowly, like something closer to pride. She moved through a series of drills, testing her speed and control, pushing herself harder than any of her formal training sessions with Damien usually allowed. She did not notice him watching until she paused to catch her breath. Damien stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed, expression unreadable in the dim light. Elena shifted back to human form, suddenly self-conscious in a way she had not expected. "I didn't realize anyone was still awake," she said. "I couldn't sleep either," Damien admitted, walking closer. "I saw the light from your training, and wanted to make sure everything was all right." "Everything's fine," Elena said, "just restless." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the moon hang low over the tree line. "Can I ask you something?" Damien said finally. "Of course. After everything that's happened these past weeks, the raid, the parley meeting, the alliance building, do you regret it? Being found out, I mean. Do you wish things had stayed hidden, that Mira had never been attacked, that none of this had ever come to light?" Elena considered the question seriously before answering. "Sometimes," she admitted, "there are moments I miss the simplicity of being invisible, of not having every wolf in the pack know my history, my bloodline, my family's tragedy. But mostly, no, I don't regret it. 7 years of hiding taught me how to survive, but it never taught me how to actually live. I was so afraid of being seen that I never let myself be known, not really, not even by Mira, until circumstances forced my hand." She paused, glancing at him. "I think I'd rather be known and afraid than hidden and alone." Something in Damien's expression softened at her words, a warmth breaking through the careful composure he usually maintained as alpha. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm glad the truth came out. Not because of the danger it's brought, but because I think Blackwood is better with you standing openly among us than it ever was with you hiding in the shadows, even if none of us realized it at the time." Elena felt her cheeks warm, unused to the direct sincerity in his voice. "That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness," Damien said. "It's the truth. You've trained harder these past weeks than warriors who've been with this pack their entire lives. You spoke up during that meeting, when Elias questioned your place here, and you changed the minds of half the pack with nothing but honesty and conviction. Whatever the Ashbourne believe about the power in your bloodline, I think the real strength people are starting to see in you has very little to do with your true form, and everything to do with who you actually are." Elena did not know how to respond to that, her throat tightening with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. She had spent 7 years believing that her value, whatever value she had, lay entirely in her ability to disappear, to avoid causing trouble, to take up as little space as possible. Hearing Damien speak about her strength, her honesty, her conviction, as though these were qualities worth admiring, rather than risks to be managed, settled something unsteady in her chest. "Thank you," she said finally, the words feeling inadequate but true. They stood together a while longer, the tension of recent weeks easing slightly under the quiet company of the moonlit field. It was not a solution to the danger still gathering beyond Blackwood's borders, not an answer to the threat Silas Ravenwood posed, or the uncertain future the White bloodline promised. But it was, Elena thought as she finally made her way back toward her cabin that night, the first time in 7 years she had felt something close to hope standing in the middle of so much uncertainty. The feeling did not last long. 3 days later, a scout returned from the border with grim news. Ashbourne warriors had been spotted moving in greater numbers along the eastern territories, gathering in a way that suggested preparation for something larger than another simple raid. Word from allied packs confirmed similar movements along shared borders, a slow, deliberate mobilization that left little doubt about what was coming. Silas Ravenwood was preparing for war. The pack council convened within hours of the scouts' report, every senior warrior and allied representative crowding into the largest meeting hall Blackwood possessed. Maps of the surrounding territories were spread across the central table, marked with the last known positions of Ashbourne forces gathered from scouts across all 4 allied packs. "They're moving slowly, deliberately," Damien said, tracing a line along the eastern border with his finger. "Not the pattern of a pack planning a quick raid. This looks like a full mobilization, possibly waiting for reinforcements from smaller allied territories before making a move." "How much time do we have?" asked Rowan Ashby, who had traveled to Blackwood personally, once word of the Ashbourne movements reached Thornfield territory. "Impossible to say for certain," Damien admitted. "Days, possibly weeks. Silas strikes me as someone who prefers overwhelming advantage to speed. He'll wait until he believes victory is guaranteed before committing his forces." Elena stood near the back of the gathering, listening intently as the discussion unfolded around defensive strategies, patrol adjustments, and potential locations for the coming conflict. Despite weeks of training and the growing respect she had earned among Blackwood's warriors, she still felt the weight of every glance that occasionally drifted her way, a reminder that whatever strategy the council developed, the true center of this conflict remained herself. "There's another option worth considering," she said finally, her voice cutting through the strategic discussion. Every head in the room turned toward her. Damien nodded for her to continue. "Silas wants the bloodline," Elena said. "Not Blackwood's territory, not a war with 4 allied packs, though he'll accept that cost if it means securing what he actually wants. What if we removed his reason for fighting at all? What if I left, drew his forces away from Blackwood entirely, gave your warriors and our allies time to prepare a proper defense, without risking the pack in a war that was never truly about territory in the first place?" "Absolutely not, Wosway," Damien said immediately, his voice sharp enough to leave no room for debate. "It's a reasonable strategic option," Elena pressed, though her voice wavered slightly under the weight of his refusal. "If I'm not here, there's no reason for him to attack Blackwood directly. He'll simply hunt you wherever you go," Rowan interjected, his tone gentler than Damien's but no less firm. "And you'll be alone, without allies, without the defenses this pack has spent weeks building." "That's not a strategy, Elena. That's a slower death sentence dressed up as sacrifice." Elena's jaw tightened, frustration rising at the immediate dismissal of an option she had genuinely believed might spare the pack unnecessary bloodshed. "Then what would you suggest?" she asked. "Because I refuse to be the reason good wolves die in a war I could have prevented by simply removing myself from the equation." Damien's expression shifted, something firmer and more determined settling into his features as he addressed her directly. "You're not removing yourself from anything," he said. "This conflict stopped being only about you the moment Silas threatened 4 allied packs with the consequences of standing beside Blackwood. This is about territory, about principle, about refusing to let a pack like the Ashbourne believe they can hunt and threaten their way into controlling other wolves' lives. Your bloodline is part of that fight, yes, but it is not the entirety of it, and running away now would not end this war. It would only ensure you faced it alone, without any of the support that's been built specifically to help you survive it." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the gathered council. Elena felt something in her chest loosen slightly, the familiar instinct to disappear, to remove herself as a burden, meeting resistance from people who genuinely seemed to want her to stay. "He's right," Mira said quietly from her seat near the front of the gathering, her arm now fully healed from the injury sustained during the raid. "You spent 7 years running and hiding, and it never once made you safer. It only made you alone. Don't go back to that now, not when you have people willing to actually fight beside you." Elena looked around the room, taking in the faces of warriors who had trained beside her for weeks, allied alphas who had committed their own pack's resources to a conflict that was not originally theirs, Mira, who had nearly died and still stood firmly in support of staying together, rather than scattering apart. Something in her resolve shifted, the old instinct toward solitary sacrifice, giving way to a newer, less familiar feeling of genuine belonging. All right, she said finally. Then let's talk about actually winning this, instead of just surviving it. The council shifted focus, moving into detailed discussions of defensive positioning, patrol coordination between the 4 allied packs, and contingency plans for various scenarios the Ashbourne forces might attempt. Elena found herself increasingly drawn into the strategic conversation, her first-hand knowledge of the Ashbourne's methods from the raid and the parley meeting proving valuable as the council refined their approach. Hours passed before the meeting finally concluded, plans set in motion for coordinated patrols across all 4 pack territories, reinforced border defenses, and a communication network that would allow for rapid response if Ashbourne forces moved against any single pack. As the gathering dispersed, Damien found Elena near the entrance of the hall, the two of them lingering, while the rest of the council filed out into the evening air. I meant what I said in there, Damien told her quietly. This isn't only about your bloodline anymore, but I understand why you offered to leave. It's the same instinct that kept you hidden for 7 years, isn't it? The belief that your safety is somehow less important than everyone else's. Elena considered his words carefully, surprised by how accurately he had identified the pattern she had followed for most of her life. I suppose it is, she admitted. It's hard to unlearn, after so many years of believing that the safest thing I could do for the people around me was disappear. You don't have to disappear anymore, Damien said, his voice gentle but firm. Not for the pack, and not for me. Whatever happens with Silas, whatever this war costs us, I'd rather face it with you standing beside us than know you sacrificed yourself trying to spare us a fight we chose to have anyway. Elena felt something warm settle in her chest at his words, an unfamiliar but welcome feeling of being genuinely wanted, not tolerated, not simply protected out of obligation, but actually valued as part of something larger than herself. Thank you, she said softly, for not letting me run. Thank you for staying, Damien replied. They stood together for a moment longer in the quiet aftermath of the council meeting, the weight of the coming conflict still heavy in the air, but somehow more bearable, shared between them rather than carried alone. Outside, the sound of warriors beginning their preparations for the days ahead carried faintly through the walls, a reminder that whatever came next, Blackwood would face it together. While the pack prepared for the war, Silas Ravenwood seemed determined to bring to their door. Damien pursued a separate investigation, one he had kept largely to himself in the weeks since the parley meeting. It concerned a question that had troubled him since Elena first told him the story of her family's death. How had the Ashbourne known where to find them, so many years ago, in a remote cabin, far from any established pack territory? He raised the question with Elena one evening, several days after the council meeting, as they reviewed old Blackwood records together in the Alpha's study, searching for any information that might explain how the current conflict had truly begun. Your family lived far from any pack border, hidden deliberately, Damien said, setting aside a stack of old territorial maps. The Ashbourne found them anyway. That kind of precise targeting doesn't happen by accident, especially against wolves, who spent years specifically avoiding detection. Elena's hands stilled over the ledger she had been examining. You think someone told them where to find us? I think it's worth investigating, Damien said carefully. And there's something else that's been bothering me. My father took over as Alpha of Blackwood almost exactly the same year your family died. Records from that period are unusually incomplete. Missing entries, gaps in the patrol logs that don't match the rest of our archives. Elena felt a chill move through her. Are you suggesting someone at Blackwood was involved? I'm suggesting it's a possibility we can't ignore, Damien said. If someone within this pack had contact with the Ashbourne years ago, providing information about wolves suspected of carrying the white bloodline, that same connection might still exist today. It would explain how Silas knew exactly what to look for during the raid, and how quickly he identified you as a target the moment your true form appeared. They spent the following days quietly reviewing old records, cross-referencing patrol assignments, trade agreements, and pack correspondence from the years surrounding Elena's arrival at Blackwood. The work was slow and often frustrating. Old documents faded and incomplete, but gradually, a pattern began to emerge. A name appeared repeatedly in connection with irregular trade agreements along the eastern border, agreements that predated Damien's father's leadership and continued quietly for years afterward. Corwin Ashfield, a senior member of Blackwood's council who had served the pack for over 2 decades, holding a position of trust and respect throughout that entire time. It could be a coincidence, Elena said carefully, staring at the old ledger entries bearing Corwin's signature. Trade agreements along the eastern border wouldn't have been unusual, even with Ashbourne territory nearby. Perhaps, Damien said, though his expression remained troubled. But the timing bothers me. These agreements increased significantly in the months before your family's death, and again in the weeks before the recent raid. That's not the pattern of ordinary trade. They approached the investigation carefully over the following week, gathering additional evidence without alerting Corwin to their suspicions, cross-referencing his movements and correspondence against known Ashbourne activity. Slowly, a troubling picture emerged. Corwin had maintained quiet contact with Ashbourne representatives for years, initially it seemed, for legitimate trade purposes along a contested border region. But somewhere along the way, that contact had evolved into something far more dangerous, an ongoing exchange of information about pack activities, including, Elena and Damien eventually confirmed through careful cross-referencing of old patrol logs, reports of a family living in seclusion in the northern hills, suspected of carrying old bloodline traits. "He sold us out," Elena said quietly, staring at the final piece of evidence Damien had uncovered, a coded correspondence between Corwin and an unnamed Ashbourne contact, dated just weeks before her family's cabin burned to the ground. "My family died because someone in this pack decided information was worth more than our lives." "We don't know if he understood the full consequences of what he was sharing," Damien said, though his voice carried little conviction behind the attempted fairness. "But the pattern is clear enough. He's been feeding information to the Ashbourne for years, likely in exchange for resources or protection along that border region. And if he's still in contact with them now, he may already know about our defensive preparations, our alliance with the other packs, everything we've been planning these past weeks." The realization settled over them both with grim weight. Whatever advantage Blackwood believed it had built through careful preparation and strategic alliance, that advantage might already be compromised by a traitor operating quietly within their own council. "We need to confront him," Elena said, "before he can pass along anything more." "Carefully," Damien cautioned. "If we move too quickly, without solid proof, he may simply deny everything and continue operating in secret. More careful, now that he knows we're aware. We need to catch him in the act, or gather evidence solid enough that denial becomes impossible." They devised a plan over the following days, working quietly with a small handful of trusted warriors, careful not to alert Corwin or any potential allies he might have within the pack. Elena found herself increasingly drawn into the investigation, her natural caution and years of careful observation, skills honed during 7 years of hiding, proving unexpectedly useful in tracking Corwin's movements and communications, without raising suspicion. The breakthrough came nearly 2 weeks after they first identified Corwin as a suspect, when a warrior assigned to discreetly monitor his movements reported an unusual late-night meeting near the eastern border, close to the same location where the original parley meeting with Silas had taken place. Elena and Damien, along with a small group of trusted warriors, moved quickly to intercept, arriving at the border in time to witness Corwin meeting with an Ashbourne representative, exchanging what appeared to be detailed maps of Blackwood's current patrol routes and defensive positions. "Corwin Ashfield," Damien said, stepping out from the tree line with his warriors flanking him on either side, his voice carrying the full authority of an alpha confronting betrayal within his own ranks. "I believe we need to have a conversation." Corwin froze, the map still clutched in his hands, his expression cycling rapidly from shock to something more calculating as he assessed his suddenly limited options. The Ashbourne representative he had been meeting with immediately turned and fled back across the border, disappearing into the darkness before anyone could pursue. "Alpha Cross," Corwin said, attempting a tone of casual dismissal that fooled no one. "This isn't what it appears to be." "It appears to be treason," Damien said flatly. "Years of treason, based on records that go back further than either of us would like to admit." "Care to explain how a senior member of this pack's council ended up sharing detailed defensive information with the same wolves currently threatening war against Blackwood and its allies?" Corwin's composed exterior finally cracked, years of careful concealment crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. "You don't understand the position I was in," he said, his voice growing desperate. "Years ago, My daughter fell ill, needed medicine our pack couldn't provide. The Ashbourne offered help, in exchange for small pieces of information, nothing that seemed truly dangerous at first. By the time I understood the scope of what they were actually using that information for, I was already too deeply involved to simply walk away. Small pieces of information, Elena said, stepping forward, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. You told them where to find a family hiding in the northern hills. My family. Because of what you shared, they burned our home down and killed my parents, and I spent 7 years alone because of a choice you made to protect yourself. Corwin's face paled as the full weight of his actions he had apparently managed to rationalize away for years, finally confronted him directly through the eyes of someone who had lived the consequences firsthand. I didn't know, he said weakly. I swear I didn't know what they intended to do with that information. Ignorance doesn't undo the damage, Damien said coldly. Take him into custody. He'll face judgment before the full council, according to pack law. As the warriors moved to secure Corwin, Elena stood staring at the man whose choices had shaped the entire trajectory of her life, whose betrayal had cost her parents everything, and left her alone in the world at 10 years old. She had expected, somehow, that finding the answer would bring a kind of closure, a resolution to the question that had haunted her for 7 years. Instead, she felt only a hollow, exhausted grief, the truth offering understanding without offering healing. It's not enough, she said quietly, once Corwin had been led away. Knowing why it happened doesn't bring them back. No, Damien agreed gently, but it does mean we can stop the same thing from happening to anyone else, and it means Silas has lost his source of information within our pack, which changes the shape of the fight ahead. Elena nodded slowly, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold night air. How much has he already told them? We'll need to assume the worst, Damien said. Adjust our defensive plans accordingly. But at least now we know, and knowing is better than fighting blind. They made their way back toward Blackwood in heavy silence, the truth about her family's death settling into Elena's chest, alongside the growing certainty that whatever came next, the coming conflict with Silas Ravenwood would arrive sooner and harder than any of them had originally prepared for. Corwin's betrayal, once confirmed before the full pack council, sent a fresh wave of unease through Blackwood, though it also brought a strange kind of relief. The mystery that had haunted Elena for 7 years finally had an answer, and the pack, having identified and removed the source of the leak, could now move forward with a clearer understanding of exactly what Silas Ravenwood might already know about their defenses. Judgment came swiftly, according to old pack law. Corwin was stripped of his council position and formally exiled from Blackwood territory, forbidden from ever returning under threat of severe consequence. Elena watched him leave from a distance, feeling none of the satisfaction she had expected, only a tired sense of closure, mixed with lingering grief, for a past that could never truly be undone. With the traitor removed, Damien shifted the council's full attention back to preparing for the conflict ahead. Reports from Allied scouts confirmed that Ashbourne forces continued gathering along the eastern border, their numbers growing steadily as smaller Allied territories contributed warriors to Silas's cause. The mobilization Damien had predicted weeks earlier was clearly approaching its final stages. We have perhaps a week, maybe less, Damien told the assembled council, gathered once more around the same table of maps that had guided their strategy for the past month. Silas has likely learned that his information source within Blackwood has been compromised, which may accelerate his timeline rather than delay it. He'll want to strike before we can adjust our defenses further. The following days passed in a blur of intensive preparation. Elena trained harder than ever, pushing her control over her true form to new limits, working alongside Damien and the pack's most experienced warriors to develop tactics that could take full advantage of her unique strength, while minimizing the risk to those fighting beside her. Your speed in wolf form is remarkable, Damien observed during one training session, watching Elena move through a complex series of drills with a grace and precision that continued to surprise even the warriors who had trained alongside her for weeks. Faster than anything I've seen from any wolf in this pack, myself included. It doesn't feel remarkable, Elena admitted, catching her breath after the exercise. It just feels like finally being allowed to move the way I was always meant to. That's exactly what makes it remarkable, Damien said. 7 years of suppression should have weakened your control, made your true form feel unfamiliar or difficult to manage. Instead, you've adapted faster than most warriors adapt to skills they've practiced their entire lives. Elena considered his words, recognizing the truth in them, even as she struggled to fully understand her own abilities. Maybe suppression taught me a kind of discipline, she said slowly. Even hiding required constant control, constant awareness of my body and my limits. Now that I'm not fighting against my own nature anymore, that same discipline just works differently. As the days passed, and the threat of Ashbourne attack grew more imminent, Elena and Damien found themselves spending increasing amounts of time together, not only in formal training sessions but in quieter moments as well. Strategic discussions that gradually gave way to more personal conversations, shared meals that stretched longer than necessary, evening walks along the reinforced border that had little to do with actual patrol duty. Elena recognized what was happening between them, though she hesitated to name it directly, uncertain how to navigate feelings she had never allowed herself to develop during 7 years of careful isolation. She had spent so long keeping everyone at a careful distance, protecting herself from the vulnerability that came with genuine connection, that the warmth growing between herself and Damien felt both wonderful and slightly terrifying. "I used to think," she admitted to him one evening, as they walked together along the border fence beneath a clear, star-filled sky, "that caring about people, letting them matter to me, was a danger I couldn't afford. Every person I let close was one more person who could be hurt because of what I am. One more person whose loss I'd have to carry. And now?" Damien asked quietly. "Now I think I spent 7 years protecting myself from something that would have made my life immeasurably better," Elena said, glancing at him. "Mira, this pack, you. I don't regret opening up to any of it, even knowing the danger that came with it." Damien stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression carrying a warmth that had grown increasingly familiar over the past weeks. "I'm glad you did," he said. "Open up, I mean, to all of it." "Me too," Elena said softly. They stood together in comfortable silence, the weight of the coming conflict momentarily forgotten in the quiet intimacy of the moment. Elena found herself thinking, not for the first time, that whatever happened in the battle ahead, she was grateful, deeply and unexpectedly grateful, for the 7 years of hiding that had somehow led her to exactly this place, standing beside exactly this person, finally unafraid to be fully seen. The moment was interrupted 3 nights later by the sound of the border alarm, sharp and urgent, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Elena was awake and moving before the second alarm bell finished ringing, her body responding with the trained instinct of weeks of preparation, rather than the panicked confusion that had gripped her during the first raid so long ago. She met Damien at the edge of the training field, both of them already dressed and ready, warriors streaming from the cabins around them in coordinated formation rather than chaotic scrambling. "This is it," Damien said grimly, watching the eastern tree line where the first shapes of an approaching force had begun to emerge from the darkness, far larger than anything they had faced during the initial raid. Elena felt her pulse quicken, but the fear that had once accompanied that feeling had transformed, over the past weeks, into something closer to readiness. She was no longer the frightened Omega who had hesitated at the edge of the training field, uncertain whether to run or fight. She was a warrior who had trained specifically for this moment, standing beside a pack and an alpha who had chosen, again and again, to stand beside her in return. "Silas is here," she said, watching as a familiar tall figure emerged at the front of the approaching Ashbourne forces, flanked by warriors whose numbers stretched far beyond anything Blackwood had faced before. "Then let's give him the fight he came for," Damien said, drawing himself up to his full height as Alpha, his voice carrying across the assembled Blackwood warriors and the allied forces that had arrived from Thornfield, Hollowmere, and Greystone in the days leading up to this moment. "Blackwood does not stand alone tonight." Elena shifted, feeling the familiar rush of her true form settling over her, no longer a secret to be hidden, but a strength to be wielded openly, standing at the front lines beside the Alpha and the pack that had, against every instinct built from 7 years of careful survival, finally become something she was willing to fight for, with everything she had. The Ashbourne forces began their advance, and the battle that would decide the future of Blackwood, and the fate of the ancient bloodline Elena carried, finally began. The battle unfolded across the training field and the reinforced border beyond it, a chaotic clash of bodies and claws that quickly spread across the entire northern edge of Blackwood territory. Elena moved through the fighting with a controlled ferocity that surprised even herself, years of careful restraint finally channeled into something purposeful rather than suppressed. She fought alongside Damien near the center of the field, the two of them moving in a coordinated rhythm built from weeks of shared training, anticipating each other's movements with an ease that came from genuine trust rather than simple tactical planning. Around them, warriors from all four allied packs fought together, pushing back against the initial wave of Ashborn forces with a coordinated defense that clearly caught Silas's warriors off guard. But Silas himself remained at the edge of the battlefield, watching the chaos unfold with the same cold, calculating patience Elena remembered from the parley meeting, waiting for the right moment to enter the fight directly. "He's watching for an opening," Elena called to Damien over the noise of battle, dodging a strike from an Ashborn warrior before countering with a precise blow that sent the attacker retreating. "He won't commit himself until he sees a weakness he can exploit." "Then we don't give him one," Damien replied, fighting off two attackers simultaneously, with a controlled efficiency that spoke to years of leadership and combat experience. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though Elena knew from the position of the moon that less time had actually passed than her exhausted body wanted to believe. Slowly, steadily, the combined forces of Blackwood and its allies began to gain ground, pushing the Ashborn warriors back toward the tree line they had emerged from. The numerical advantage Silas had counted on eroded by the strength of genuine alliance and coordinated defense. Recognizing the shifting tide, Silas finally entered the fight directly, moving with a speed and precision that immediately marked him as a threat far beyond his ordinary warriors. He cut through the battlefield with brutal efficiency, clearly searching for one target above all others. He found Elena near the edge of the field, having just fought off a group of Ashborn warriors alongside two Thornfield fighters. "You've caused me considerable trouble," Silas said, his violet eyes gleaming with cold fury as he circled her, his human form radiating a barely contained power that had been carefully hidden during their earlier parley meeting. Corwin was a valuable source of information, cultivated over years of patient investment. Losing him, and now potentially losing this entire engagement, has become an unacceptable cost for something that should have been simple. "You should have left my family alone," Elena said, shifting into her full wolf form as she spoke, her white fur seeming to glow beneath the moonlight as adrenaline and years of buried grief finally found a focused outlet. "None of this needed to happen. Your family made the mistake of hiding what should have been embraced," Silas replied, shifting into his own wolf form, a dark, powerful shape with violet eyes that seemed to burn even brighter in this form. "The bloodline you carry was never meant to be wasted on a quiet, hidden life. It deserves to be wielded, to reshape the world, the way the old stories always promised. I intend to see that promise fulfilled, with or without your cooperation." He lunged before Elena could respond further, and the two wolves collided in a burst of white and shadow, claws and teeth meeting in a fierce exchange that drew the attention of every warrior still fighting nearby. Elena fought with everything she had learned over the past weeks, every hour of training, every lesson in control and strategy, channeled into a battle that felt, in this moment, like it carried the weight of her entire life. Silas was strong, stronger than any opponent she had faced during her training sessions, his years of dedicated preparation for exactly this kind of confrontation, evident in every calculated strike. But Elena had something he did not, a genuine desperation born not from ambition or obsession, but from a fierce determination to protect the life and the people she had finally allowed herself to build. They exchanged blow after blow, the fight carrying them across the field, other combatants instinctively clearing space around the two most powerful wolves on the battlefield. Elena felt exhaustion beginning to creep into her limbs, but she pushed through it, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, fueled by the memory of her parents, of 7 years of hiding, of Mira bleeding on this same field months earlier, of every reason she had to end this threat once and for all. Silas caught her with a heavy strike that sent her tumbling across the packed dirt, and for a moment, pain and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. She struggled to rise, watching as Silas advanced, his expression carrying the confident certainty of a wolf who believed victory was finally within reach. "It's over," he said, his voice carrying easily across the momentarily quiet space around them. You cannot win this fight alone. She's not alone. Damien's voice cut through the tension, and Elena looked up to see him arriving at her side, having fought his way across the battlefield the moment he realized Silas had targeted her directly. Behind him, Mira and a group of warriors from all 4 allied packs formed a protective circle, having recognized the same danger and rallied to close the distance. Silas's confident expression faltered slightly as he took in the gathered wolves surrounding him, the tactical advantage he had counted on evaporating in the face of genuine, coordinated alliance. You cannot fight an entire pack, Silas, Damien said, helping Elena rise to her feet, both of them now standing united against the Ashbourne Alpha. Whatever power you believe the bloodline holds, it means nothing against wolves who choose to stand together. Elena felt renewed strength flow through her, drawing not just from her own determination, but from the genuine support surrounding her. Warriors who had trained beside her, fought beside her, chosen to protect her not out of obligation, but out of real, hard-earned respect and friendship. She rose fully, shifting back into her true white form, standing beside Damien with a confidence that had nothing to do with suppression or hiding, and everything to do with finally, fully, being herself. This ends now, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the battlefield. Silas looked around at the gathered forces, his warriors retreating steadily under the combined pressure of the allied packs, his own position increasingly isolated as the battle turned decisively against him. For the first time since Elena had encountered him, something like genuine uncertainty flickered across his expression. But rather than retreat, Silas's expression hardened into something more desperate and dangerous. If I cannot claim the bloodline, he snarled, then no one will. He lunged forward with a final, reckless burst of speed, aiming not for Elena directly but for Damien, recognizing perhaps in his final desperate calculation that striking at the Alpha who had rallied such fierce loyalty might yet turn the tide of the battle in his favor. Elena moved without thinking, throwing herself between Silas and Damien with a speed that surprised even her own trained instincts, meeting the Ashbourne Alpha's attack head-on in a final, decisive clash that would determine the outcome of everything that had led to this single moment. The impact of the collision echoed across the battlefield, white and dark fur meeting in a final, desperate struggle that seemed, for a suspended moment, to hold the entire fight in perfect stillness. Elena felt Silas's full weight and strength bear down on her, years of dedicated training and obsessive ambition channeled into a single, powerful strike, aimed at ending the threat she posed to his plans once and for all. But Elena had something Silas had spent his entire pursuit failing to understand. She was not fighting for power, or for some abstract old prophecy about balance and control. She was fighting for a life she had built, a pack that had chosen her, a friend who had nearly died and stood by her anyway, an Alpha who had refused to let her sacrifice herself even when she believed it might be the safest option for everyone else. That difference, small and immeasurable as it seemed in the heat of battle, proved decisive. Elena twisted beneath Silas's attack at the last possible moment, using his own momentum against him, in a move she had practiced countless times during training sessions with Damien, redirecting his powerful strike into empty air, while positioning herself for a counter that carried every ounce of strength and determination she possessed. Her claws found their mark, and Silas's advance faltered, his powerful form staggering under the force of her response. He recovered quickly, snarling in fury, but the brief opening had been enough. Damien moved in immediately, coordinating with Elena in the same practiced rhythm that had carried them through the entire battle, and together, they drove Silas back, step by step, until the Ashbourne Alpha found himself surrounded not just by 2 determined opponents, but by the full weight of the allied forces closing in around him. Silas looked around at the tightening circle, at his own warriors retreating in growing numbers as the battle turned decisively against Ashbourne forces across the entire field, and something in his cold, calculating expression finally cracked into genuine desperation. "This isn't finished," he snarled, though the words carried the hollow ring of a wolf who understood, even as he spoke them, that tonight's battle was already lost. The bloodline will not stay hidden forever. Others will come, if I do not. "Then we'll be ready for them too," Elena said, standing firm despite her exhaustion, refusing to let his final threats shake the hard-won confidence she had built over the past months. Just as we were ready for you. Silas held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his violet eyes, before he finally turned and retreated, calling a sharp command that sent his remaining warriors scattering back across the border, abandoning the fight entirely, rather than face complete destruction against the combined forces arrayed against them. The battlefield fell into an exhausted, disbelieving silence as the last of the Ashbourne forces disappeared into the tree line, leaving behind a field marked by the cost of battle, but ultimately, undeniably, belonging to Blackwood and its allies. Cheers began to rise slowly across the field, warriors from all four packs recognizing the significance of what they had accomplished together, driving back a threat that had gathered strength for weeks, that had seemed, only hours earlier, poised to overwhelm everything Blackwood had worked to build. Elena felt her legs finally give way beneath the weight of exhaustion and release tension, and Damien caught her before she could fall, both of them shifting back into human form as the adrenaline of battle slowly ebbed away. "We did it," Elena said, her voice carrying disbelief and exhaustion in equal measure. "You did it," Damien corrected gently, helping her steady herself. "Everything about tonight, the alliance, the defense, the fight itself, all of it started because you finally stopped hiding and let this pack see exactly who you are." Around them, the battlefield slowly transformed from a site of conflict into a scene of quiet celebration and relief, warriors tending to injuries, allied alphas exchanging words of gratitude and continued partnership, Mira making her way toward Elena with an expression of fierce, relieved pride. "You were incredible," Mira said, pulling Elena into a careful hug, mindful of the exhaustion evident in her friend's posture. "I always knew there was something remarkable about you, even before I understood what it actually was." In the days that followed, Blackwood territory slowly returned to a rhythm of recovery and rebuilding, though it was a rhythm fundamentally different from the careful, secretive pace Elena had maintained for 7 long years before that first fateful raid. Word of the battle spread quickly across the region, carrying with it not fear of the white bloodline, as Silas had once threatened, but respect for a pack that had stood united against a genuine threat, and admiration for the wolf, whose courage had helped make that unity possible. Elena found herself, in the weeks that followed, occupying a role within Blackwood that would have seemed impossible only months earlier. No longer an Omega hiding in the shadows of pack life, she trained alongside the pack's most respected warriors, contributed to council discussions with a voice that carried genuine weight and consideration, and walked through Blackwood territory without the careful, practiced invisibility that had once defined every single day of her existence. The change in her relationship with Damien evolved alongside these broader shifts, the careful, professional distance of alpha and pack member, gradually giving way to something warmer, more openly affectionate, built on the foundation of trust and partnership, forged through weeks of shared preparation, and the fierce, decisive battle that had finally secured Blackwood's future. "I used to think," Elena told him one evening, the two of them sitting together near the same training field where her secret had first been revealed so many months earlier, that surviving meant staying invisible, that the safest life was the smallest one, the quietest one, the one where no one ever really saw me at all. "And now?" Damien asked, echoing the same question he had asked her once before, in the early uncertain days following the initial raid. "Now I think survival was never really the goal," Elena said, watching the moonlight settle over the field where she had first allowed her true form to emerge after 7 years of careful hiding. "Living was. Actually living, not just enduring. I spent 7 years surviving as an Omega, hiding what I truly was, because I believed it was the only way to stay safe. But safety, without connection, without purpose, without people who genuinely know and care about you, isn't really living at all." Damien reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers with a quiet certainty that had grown between them over the difficult months of preparation and battle. "I'm glad you finally get to find out what living actually feels like," he said. "And I'm grateful, more than I can properly say, that Blackwood gets to be part of that story." Elena leaned into him, feeling the weight of 7 years of hidden fear finally settle into something like peace. The White Wolf bloodline she carried, once a secret burden threatening to consume everything she loved, had become instead the very thing that had led her to exactly this life, This pack, this quiet, hard-won moment of belonging. She was no longer the Omega who had hidden in plain sight for 7 long years, disguising her true nature out of fear and grief, and the desperate need to survive at any cost. She was Elena Voss, the White Wolf of Blackwood, standing openly in her true form at last, surrounded by a pack that had chosen to protect her, not because they had to, but because, through every trial of the past difficult months, she had proven herself worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth finally, fully, being seen. And as the moon rose high over Blackwood territory, casting its pale silver light across a pack finally at peace, Elena understood, for the first time in her entire life, exactly what it meant to truly belong somewhere. The end.